bleach blonde, bad-built Butch Beach Body Spice, Jasmine Crockett of the Socialist Spice Girls in the House Democrat Socialist Caucus. She's sick of mediocre white boys and their tears. We know this. She has suggested that brown people are going to be rounded up by the Trump administration. And she reminds us often that she's an officer of the court. She's an accomplished attorney, so she tells us. So when she speaks about matters of law and order, you should E.F. Hutton her. You should listen up. And she did yesterday in a hearing over Doge activity. And guess what phrase she used? Yeah, that one. Yeah, that one. The one that they've all been using. They read from the same script.
I'm trying to figure out exactly what it is that the Republicans believe our job is, because right now they have relinquished their constitutional duties over to an unelected bureaucrat, someone who no one went out to vote for. And absolutely, he is occupying the Oval Office, as we saw yesterday. And that is a first for me, to see someone occupying the Oval Office who's never actually been elected to the Oval Office and actually answering more questions than the person that allegedly got elected. But for whatever reason, this is the first time we're having a Doge subcommittee hearing, and that guy's not here. Instead, we have y'all. So I do want to thank you for coming.
Constitutional crisis. Did Trump allegedly get elected? Oh, we're doing that now? Interesting. Anyway, so yeah, constitutional crisis, constitutional crisis, constitutional crisis. Nothing of the sort. Actually, Kim Strauss has a good piece in the Journal today about how the lawfare of the left may not fare as well on many of these matters as it has previously. But that's not going to be for lack of trying by the two Johns. The two Johns are the federal judges prostituting themselves for big government. I'm talking about John McConnell from Rhode Island, John Bates from D.C., and we may have a constitutional issue, and not the one Jasmine Crockett is inventing, but with these judges and with inferior courts, Article 3 courts, created as Congress may deem necessary. That conversation is starting now because of the behavior of the two Johns. And it's not strictly limited to a disagreement about judicial philosophy or interpretation of executive power. No, it's about conflicts of interest. For example, Eco, this guy, that Substacker who has popped up, and he seems to, first of all, he's doing some pretty good investigative work, and secondly, he seems to have a in with the Doge boys, with the sort of detailed information he's providing, much of which has checked out. Judge McConnell, John McConnell, one of the two Johns from Rhode Island, and this is documented. He made direct contributions to senators who confirmed his appointment, senators of the Democrat Socialist variety, who are the loyal opposition here to what Doge is doing, what the president is doing. The actual amounts don't really matter. It's the appearance of impropriety. Judge John Bates, the other John, his wife founded Hope for Children in Ethiopia, which is a recipient of USAID funding.
Oh, go figure. Wow, I'm shocked.
And these are the two Johns are the judges putting the stop orders on the Doge activity. His daughter works at the Department of Education. So he is opposing the efforts of the Trump administration to make adjustments to the way USAID operates, where it spends and doesn't spend. Department of Education. The other thing that they've done is where there is documented evidence of fraud, they're ordering the Trump administration to continue allowing USAID, Department of Education, to spend how they spend. As Eco writes about this, and I tend to agree with him, this is like a systemic problem. in terms of judges like these two, and they're members of Congress who are introducing articles of impeachment against both of them. And it's not this again. This isn't a matter of a disagreement over judicial interpretation of statute. This is a matter of being compromised and having a lifetime appointment on the bench. That's the systemic part of it. If we're going to allow this sort of thing to continue, and at least a couple of members of Congress don't want it to. For more on the topic, pleased to be joined by Professor William Jacobson. He is a clinical professor of law and director of the Securities Law Clinic at Cornell. He's also the founder of LegalInsurrection.com and president of the Legal Insurrection Foundation, as well as the Equal Protection Project. Professor Jacobson, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on again.
Well, what's your view on the two Johns?
You know, I don't know enough about them. I know a little bit more about McConnell because he's from Rhode Island, and we covered at the website the controversy over his nomination, which was widespread. It wasn't conservative media. It was Politico really broke the story that he had donated close to $700,000 to Democrat-related causes, including, I think it was $12,000 to Sheldon Whitehouse, one of the senators who nominated him for the bench. So that was all out there, and that was a big controversy at the time, and Republicans were unsuccessful in stopping the nominations. So I don't know anything about the other person that you mentioned other than what's been in the news. So I would say in these things, people might be making a mistake. People who are opposing what's happening in the judiciary might be making a mistake by trying to personalize it to a particular judge, because you either have the proof that it's a legal conflict that requires recusal or you don't. The bigger problem is that in 40-some-odd lawsuits, and particularly about a half dozen, the two that you've mentioned, the one in Boston involving National Institutes for Health, the one in New York where a emergency judge basically decapitated the Treasury Department at 1 a.m. on a Saturday morning. The bigger issue is that the Democrats' strategy of resistance is to have the federal judiciary take over the executive department and run it. And that's a bit of an exaggeration, but it's not much of an exaggeration. So I think that's what people need to be focusing on. If you try to personalize it to a judge, they've got lifetime appointment. It might make good press, might get people excited, but neither of these judges is being removed from the bench through impeachment because it would never get through the Senate. So I think I think people are focusing on the wrong things. I think people need to understand that this is an attempt to make a job offer to the federal judiciary to run the federal, executive branch, and that's really what's going on here. I don't think it'll hold up very long. They have had a shock and awe on the lawfare, but they really haven't accomplished a lot substantively so far. The order decapitating the Treasury Department was walked back by the permanent judge assigned to the case as opposed to the emergency judge. And now the senior leadership is restored, and I don't think that any of it will survive when she finally rules at the end of this week or next week. The offer that Trump made for federal employees to take a buyout offer was temporarily freezed, and then it was unfrozen. So those buyout offers are back. So Democrats achieved a lot of shock and awe with emergency, hair on fire, motions that the judges should not have granted in almost every single case. But, I think people need to keep the bigger picture, in mind, as opposed to doing what the Democrats do when they go after, Justice Thomas and people like that. And I know a lot of people say, well, they do it, we should too. I think people are missing the bigger picture here.
Well, I mean, I think you can walk and chew gum. I think you can focus on sort of the bigger picture, as you say, the fundamental issue here. That, as you say, the effort by Democrats to have the judiciary take over the executive. One branch consume the other, but you have to I think you do have to personalize it, and I think you have to hold people to account. And people do focus on individuals as proxies for the bigger picture. And one of the things is if this all checks out, and there's I mean, it looks like it checks out, that you have conflicts of interest, at least colorable conflicts of interest with these judges, then it does speak to potentially a larger problem in the federal judiciary with these lifetime appointments. And to make an example of one or two, to send a message, not just about conflicts of interest, but also about any attempts to, unduly slow walk this process because you have this idea that Trump has a 2-year clock and maybe we can push some of these things off and we can get Democrat control of the House and Senate again and facilitate that. I think you do have to fixate people on something they can readily understand, like a judge doing the bidding of the left because he's compromised and aligned.
Well, if he's compromised and aligned, I mean, we do have a Trump administration and Trump Department of Justice. They should be moving to recuse these people.
Yeah,
people screaming on X and et cetera isn't going to accomplish anything, other than whipping people into a frenzy. So, I think the question is, if there are legitimate conflicts of interest, then the Trump administration, the Trump Department of Justice, Pam Bondi needs to be more aggressive in trying to get judges removed from the case. But if all it is basically what the other side says about Republicans, this person was a member of the Federalist Society, or this person is close to such and such senator, you're not going to get very far. I mean, you're spitting in the wind with that. And that's what was, claimed when, Republicans would go to judges in Texas in the Fifth Circuit to oppose Biden, and the opposition to Trump is mostly going in deep blue states where they have a high percentage likelihood of getting a friendly judge. It's a problem, but that's a longer-term issue. Right now, the federal government, the DOJ, if it believes there actually is a conflict, needs to move to recuse the judges.
I agree with that. Sometimes the internet is faster than the Department of Justice, and pressure is applied that way. So we'll see. But that's a fair point. I want to get your take on something too. This is just sort of interesting. We're making America the War of 1812 again. Tim Burchett, a Republican from Tennessee, introducing the Cartel Mark and Reprisal Authorization Act, which would authorize Trump to provide letters of marque to privately armed and equipped individuals or groups to seize persons and property of any cartel member, or cartel-linked organization. That is literally, from the Revolutionary. This has been done before. Revolutionary War, War of 1812, as I just mentioned. I don't know if it still has modern application, and I have some concerns about it, but what do you think about that legislation?
Well, I don't know if bounty hunters is the right term.
Sort of, yeah. Privateers, yeah.
Okay. So I don't know. I haven't read the legislation, but we do. Republicans have control of the federal government. Okay, Republicans have control of an enormous law enforcement bureaucracy right now. Do they really need to hire private people to do this? Why doesn't our government do it? To me, that's kind of sidestepping the issue, So I'm not really, the U.S. government, I believe, has designated these cartels as terrorist groups. There's an enormous power that, a lot of people used to complain about that the federal government has over groups that are, designated foreign terrorist entities. Again, people are looking for quick fixes with ideas that, may get attention, but we do have control. Republicans have control of an enormous federal power right now. And the question should be, if you need private individuals to go out and seize assets, why is that? Why isn't the government doing that? It's one thing when, it was run by the Biden administration and people could say, well, we need, Biden won't do it. I think the pressure needs to be put on the Trump administration to be more aggressive if that's what's needed, rather than outsourcing it to private individuals or private groups.
I wanted to ask you about. Oh, Dan, did you want to do a follow-up?
Well, I wanted to get your view about the approach the Department of Justice is taking with sanctuary city-state jurisdictions, suing Illinois and Chicago, suing New York State. Do you see any legal issues with suing them and basically withholding funds, which is where they want to go, withholding federal funds that they were otherwise earmarked to get?
Well, I'm not really sure why they needed to sue them. Aren't there provisions in the various acts, or don't they have the power to withhold that funding if they're violating the law? Now, maybe they wanted legal cover for that. So yeah, I mean, I think that sanctuary cities are violating federal immigration law, and there's many ways to deal with that. One is withholding funds. I'm not sure why they needed to file a lawsuit to do that, other than perhaps they were concerned if they just did it unilaterally, they'd be on the receiving end of a lawsuit. But so I'm not really understanding the procedure that they're using. I'm not opposed to withdrawing the funds and withholding the funds. Just not sure why they needed a lawsuit to do that.
My sense, and I may be wrong on this, but my sense is that there's some discrepancy. That on the one hand you'll have a Pritzker or a Hochul say we're not violating federal immigration law. We're just not using local resources to help federal law enforcement, and that's not against the law. Whereas the representations that Department of Justice has made in court in both cases is actually they are actively impeding federal law enforcement, and this is the basis to withhold the funds.
Well, actually impeding and interfering with federal law enforcement, I believe, is a crime.
Right. No, I know.
Why, why aren't they doing this criminally as opposed to, if they have the evidence that there's actual interference, but again, I think probably what they want is they want a ruling that they can then jump off of as opposed to just doing it. But if they have evidence, and they've threatened it, okay? If they have evidence that someone is actually interfering in federal immigration enforcement as opposed to just sitting on your hands and, not doing anything, there are plenty of criminal statutes available, or there are criminal statutes available to address people who do that. And they did threaten, that if there is interference, there will be criminal prosecutions. So, one thing that we all see, repeatedly in history, at least modern history, is that Democrat administrations are much better and much more efficient at wielding their power than Republicans are. And we're seeing that again. If there had been a policy, you look at how many people got prosecuted by the Biden administration. Look how methodical they were in destroying our immigration laws. They just do it and don't worry about it. Republicans move more cautiously. And, part of that is, the Democrats keep screaming about respect for the rule of law. Republicans are ruining it. In fact, it's just the opposite, actually. The Republicans have tremendous respect for the rule of law. That's why perhaps Pam Bondi is filing a suit to cut off the funding as opposed to just doing it.
Well, real quickly, is there anything unconstitutional and illegal about what Doge, Elon Musk, Trump is doing while they're dismantling USAID?
Not that I see. I don't see any, thing that's wrong with the executive department putting in place the people it believes should be in place to, root out waste, fraud, and abuse. I don't see how that's unconstitutional. This is the problem. This is the problem in that New York Southern District of New York case that with the 1 a.m. Saturday morning emergency TRO regarding the Treasury Department. The judiciary doesn't get to decide and nitpick how the executive branch runs the executive branch. And that's what all these judges are being asked to do. They're being asked to substitute somebody else's judgment, mostly a political judgment, for the judgment of the people who actually are in control of the executive branch. And the New York one, to me, was maybe the most outrageous, which is at 9:45 p.m. on a Friday night, 18 states, I think it was, led by Letitia James, New York Attorney General's office, went in claiming that there was this wholesale threat to exposing personal information because the Trump administration had allowed people access to Treasury systems. An emergency, the world's going to end. The judge at 1 a.m., without even giving the government a chance to be heard, signs an order removing all political appointees from access to those systems, which would have included the Secretary of Treasury.
Right.
It was an embarrassment, that order. It's been walked back by the next judge. But the point is, they're now arguing in court, and I've been following all the court papers that have been filed. The government put in its position finally when it was given an opportunity and said there's no case here. There's no legal claim. There's no standing for states to sue, that there is no threat to anything. In fact, there wasn't like the Doge team coming in and looting the system. There was one person who had access, carefully monitored, who was a special employee, had no ability to change anything, no ability to download anything, had view-only access. They monitored him carefully. And by the time the lawsuit was filed, he wasn't even working for them anymore. And there was one other person, a senior person who's still there, who had over-the-shoulder access. I mean, he couldn't do anything, but he could observe other people doing it. So there was no threat. It was completely invented. The court jumped the gun on it. I think it will be walked back. But if it's not walked back, and if the current judge who's in place continues limitations on political appointees controlling the Department of Treasury, I think that goes up on appeal. I think it gets reversed, and I think it needs to be. I mean, the federal judiciary has a very important role, and I'm not bashing the judiciary as a whole, but they're being asked by the Democrats to do something that is not the role of the judiciary, which is to pass political judgments on whether what an executive department does is good or bad. And a federal judge is in no better position than the people at Treasury to decide what the appropriate security measures are. That's not for a federal judge to decide, and that's the problem here.
Professor William Jacobson, clinical professor of law and director of the Securities Law Clinic at Cornell, founder of LegalInsurrection.com, and president of the Legal Insurrection Foundation, as well as the Equal Protection Project. Professor Jacobson, thank you. Appreciate it as always.
Great. Take care.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line. All right, coming up on Chicago's Morning Answer.
Cincinnati Children's Hospital denies a 12-year-old a heart transplant. You'll find out why, and we'll discuss